Good evening, everyone. I'm Nicole Tallman, and I am the editor for Redacted Books, which is an imprint of ELJ Editions. And tonight we are celebrating place poetry. And I have the honor of hosting three amazing poets, Scott Cunningham, J.D. Isip, and Denton Loving. And we're going to dive right into the readings. And just to give you a quick run of show, each of our featured readers are going to read between 10 and 15 minutes. And then at the end, we're going to open it up to Q&A. So if you have questions, you can feel free to pop them in the chat, or you can just wait until the end to ask the questions. And I'm going to read each featured speaker's bio. And I'm also going to plug their books into the chat so that you can help support them in their amazing books. If you can, that would be amazing. So our first reader is Scott Cunningham, and Scott is the author of Yativeo from the University of Arkansas Press, 2018. It was selected as part of the Miller Williams Poetry Series. Scott's poems, essays, and translations have appeared in The Nation, American Poetry Review, Gulf Coast Poetry, A Public Space, Harvard Review, Monocle, and The Guardian, among others. He lives in Miami, Florida, where he serves as the executive and artistic director of our beloved Oh Miami. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Nicole. All right, so I go. All right. I wasn't sure if you were doing all the bios, like front loading them and then turning it over, but I'm ready.
I was not clear. You are up, Scott. We are ready for you.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. Sorry about that. Well, thanks for great to see everybody, and thanks for being here on a Thursday night. The theme of this reading is place, and so I'm going to mostly read Miami poems, but I'm actually going to start with the poem that takes place in San Francisco. And the only thing that I think you need to know is that the lead singer of Radiohead is a guy named Tom York, if you didn't know that already, but that's relevant. And the poem is called Statement of Poetics. You can't sing, but you're taking voice lessons with a private teacher in San Francisco. You're 21. It's just you and her in the closet-sized room. The song you're singing is Radiohead's Karma Police. To help you stay on key, she plays the song on the stereo and turns the volume up when you start to get lost. You want to be good at singing so bad that sometimes you think you concentrate on your desire instead of on the music. You know you're not getting any better. It's possible the teacher is turning the volume up to help herself. You walk out of your lesson and there's a kid, age 9 or 10, waiting in the hallway. She heard you singing through the wall. I love your voice, she says. And although you know that who she heard was not you, but Tom York, you thank her and can't help but feel later as you return to the streets of this strange city where it's colder in the summer. You're 21. And maybe love, even as a misrecognition, can change a person. Maybe it's okay that every beautiful sound you've ever made came from somewhere else. Thank you for the air claps. I love air claps. The next poem goes back to Miami. So in the manuscript I'm working on, there's a bunch of poems that all have kind of a similar title structure, which is My Heart, also known as, and then the place that thing that it's also known as is always a place in Miami. So this one is called My Heart, also known as the mango tree hanging over the I-95 retaining wall at Northwest 65th Street. The job of the wall is to keep the noise of the traffic from reaching the houses on the other side, while the job of the tree is to grow over the wall, stretching to eat the morning sun it uses to manufacture the fruit that hangs for 3 weeks in June, like disobeyed traffic lights, changing slowly from the color of night to a shade of noon. No one ever picks these mangoes, but the tree keeps on making them. It doesn't need a beneficiary to give a blessing, dropping them without warning onto the asphalt where they break and bleed out their juice into a permanent shadow, the highway like a piece of paper onto which the tree draws a picture of itself. Ode to East. Ode to mornings and beginnings and birth and belief and bright pink. Ode to origins and setting out and ovulating and obads and all of us in the same house at the same time with nowhere to go for as long as the day lasts. And the day does last because the day housed in the east, never dies. Ode to the throats of roosters, the peaks of landfills, the tips of mangroves. Ode to the sun's hands in the evening, straining to hang on to the east branches, its fingers turning purple from the strain. Ode to eggs and yolks and pans and beans and seeds. Ode to ease and easel and yeast, a cell rising just by being, like us, left out. Ode to oceans, ode to tides, ode to the waves turning white as they arrive from where else? The east, stretching to greet us, to genuflect at our toes. Ode to stretching and diving and unraveling in the current, arms churning, hand over hand as the continental shelf falls away beneath us. We're heading east, a bearing that means a deepening, means meditation, means mystery, devotion, and dying as in colors darkening, becoming more and more like themselves. Ode to not knowing what will happen after dark. Ode to the horizon, how it sentences us to its origin. Ode to the navel. Ode to the orange. This poem's called Elegy for a Poet Who Loves Sneakers. I didn't know who you were, and then you died. I went searching for your poems online, devouring one after another, then reading your Twitter feed backwards, your voice getting younger and younger. And that's where I found the last pair of sneakers you ever bought, all black Air Max 90s. I have a black pair too, and a pair that are pink and teal. I don't wear either of them enough, and that's one problem with loving sneakers. The more you obsess over them, the more you buy, and the less you wear each pair. In college, my friend Arshad told me that every year you add to your life, the shorter each one is in relation to the total, the significance of each day diminishing as you collect them. God damn, I said, but kept wanting days to be over so that I could get to the next one. If I had found your poems just a few months earlier, I could have emailed you. You asked people to do that. You'd worked in a casino and said you'd teach them the right way to play blackjack. We could have talked about cards and then shoes and then basketball. We would have gotten to poems eventually, or we wouldn't have. There's nothing new about poems, and no one knows the right way to write them. Now I'm watching a craft talk you gave about the body, how we feel it before we know it's failing. And that's what it is about sneakers, isn't it? They're part of the body, but they come off. Thank you. 3 more, and then I'm out. This one is called Private School. It's about the high school I went to. It's a short little poem. Private school. There were 2 chapels on campus, one for assemblies, the other a hollowed out banyan tree some girls smoked cigarettes in. A storm had blown it over and made a room inside its tangles, the trunk turned sideways, marbled like the walls of a cathedral. From the parking lot, their laughter had the tone of singing. Every now and then, a line of smoke rose up above their steeple. Thank you. Then this penultimate one is after a poet named Matthew Olsman, whose most recent book, Constellation Route, is like, if you haven't read it, I think it's one of the best books that's come out in the last 10 years. It's just amazing. But so he has all these poems in the book that are like letters to people, so kind of an epistolary form. So this is after Matthew Olsman, and it's called Letter to Christina, who's my wife, written while sweeping up dead alates. I had to look it up too. Alates are ants with wings. They can also be a kind of swarming termite, but the ones in a pile at my feet are definitely not termites because their thoraxes are too narrow. These corpses are ants who grew their wings in order to establish a new colony, and unfortunately ended up in the roof of my office where they shed their wings and died, ending their lives, and worse, making a mess for me to clean up. Alates mate mid-flight, as if they were members of an animal kingdom mile-high club, which makes me think that the insect swarming that happens every spring in Miami is not that different from the human swarming that happens every spring in Miami, one big traveling mass of buzzing and effing down the runway of humidity and sunlight. I forgot to mention that I'm not going to say the F word because my kids might be listening to this. Meanwhile, you and I have already lost our wings. Day after day, we're feeding the colony, trying to keep them alive and not drawing on the effing rugs with effing markers. Rugs, even so-so rugs like ours, are expensive to clean or replace, and it would be great if the colony could just keep their little thoraxes off of them. But the stains are already there, so we might as well wait to replace the rugs until the colony no longer cares about creative expression or sunlight or us, and we can sleep in or lock the doors and not sleep in. And won't those be the days? We won't even need the thrill of flight to make it exciting. Although, if I'm being honest, I'm worried that those days might come too late, that my body will be so ravaged by then that you'll roll over to me and I'll just be a collapsing old queen with a bad back who's used up all of her energy. My wish right now is that instead of this letter, I could give you my youth, the swarm of it, that sleepless drive I lived in for years, trying to arrive at some place I couldn't name, but that I knew would be my home, and that I know now was this moment, this house, here, with you. I just wish it hadn't taken so long, that the journey hadn't required so much, and that your reward for finding me could be more than what it will be, a task, a sweeping up. Thanks. Sorry, I kind of messed up the cadence of that with my effing note, but anyway. So this is the last poem I'm going to read. Thanks everybody for listening, and I'm really excited to hear the other two poets read. So I'll be done after this one. This one is called Birth Story, and it's about I have 3 kids, and this is about the birth of my oldest daughter, Ada. Birth story. Alone in scrubs and mask, I thought I should write down my thoughts. 1, The Great Wave by Hokusai. 2, the movie Fletch, the scene inside the hospital where he's impersonating a doctor and another doctor sees him and asks him to hold a corpse's spleen, and he does and passes out on the linoleum. 3, buying brand new jeans with holes already in them, as if purchasing the keys to time itself. 4, at 17, passing a small hip flask around that squat pit of grass between the ceiling of the Camino Real bridge and the top of the concrete seawall, pretending when it arrives in my hands to drink, but still tasting the awful sharpness on the flask's lip. And then the nurse interrupts my daydream to drag me down the corridor's bleach white walls and drawings of forlorn stick men to where my daughter is being born. On the operating table slab lies Christina, bisected by a curtain, arms wide, wrists IV'd, her body trembling from the drugs and not the disemboweling. A young anesthesiologist in Easter peep-colored Crocs above her head. I weep. I fill my mask with snot. Dr. Dorn announces the denouement. A hush shushes us, and a tiny will, like a finger snap, cracks itself open. The sound unleashes itself. A seashell attached to an Aztec whistle, a golden firework, a missile of oranges, a brand new engine in an empty garage, a pigeon's inner beacon in the full pulse of flight's return toward home, toward us. Slick, face washed as if with whiteout, her form is peeked around the corner. The sound she insists on deepens and persists. I exist. I exist. Her voice is like one of those instruments made from something that isn't an instrument. Like at that jazz show I saw in Evanston in the year 2000 and whatever, 3 elder millennials tapping their mics with 4 candles as if to say, listen, what you thought was music isn't, but buddy, this is it. Her little feet blackened with ink impressed onto my hand skin, the way her hearing is tested, a pair of headphones playing haphazard dings and dongs into her skull. The whole world a song with no words or bridge or chorus, just the mess of heat, us that holds her close and repeats her name over and over. Ada, Ada. We pounded into the world's thick hide to make it stick. I think whoever did this, I mean, in a cosmic sense, thank you. Otherwise, I don't know what to do. I can't believe they let us put her in a seat that fastens to another seat and take her away in the suddenly very penetrable car. I drive 20 miles under the speed limit like a senior who's lost his marbles and escaped from the old folks' home by stealing his own vehicle. A silver alert, they call it. Maybe this too is an emergency, a blue alert, named for the color of what we can't see past, only into, be it sky or ocean, those depths that both comfort us and make us alien. I can't stop looking in the rearview mirror to make sure she's still with us. Welcome to this earth, fellow person. I've never been here before either. Thank you all.
Oh, wow, that was fantastic. Especially that last poem. I don't think I've heard that one before. That's beautiful, Scott. Thank you so much.
I've never read it out loud before. So.
Okay. Well, I see that Lenny is representing with his Oh Miami shirt. Hey, Miami's
Thank you, Lenny.
together. Go, Lenny. Thank you for that. So, oh, you have a fan there, Scott.
That's the Ada of the poem.
She's excited to hear that one. All right, our next reader is JD Isip. JD's poetry collections include Kissing the Wound from Moontide Press 2023 and Pocketing Feathers from Sadie Girl Press 2015. His third collection, tentatively titled I Wasn't Finished, will be out for Moontide Press the end of 2024 or early 2025. JD earned his BA and MA at California State University Fullerton and his PhD at Texas A&M University Commerce. He is a professor of English at Collin College in Plano, Texas, where he lives with his dogs, Ivy and Bucky, who may or may not make an appearance during this reading. Welcome, JD. Let's all give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the support for Ivy and Bucky. Thank you, Nicole and ELJ, for doing this. It's fantastic. I love listening to all of the other poets. And it's hard to follow up Scott, but here we go. So I'm going to start out with a poem in my first collection. It's the poem that the title comes from. And this is from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. And at the time, it was under construction. So all of the pieces that I'm talking about here are in different places now, so the poem doesn't make sense, but that's okay. So here we are. Rijksmuseum 2012. Cornered in one frame is a study of falling Phaeton and Icarus in various angles, making the same plunge. Reached before because they wanted sight past horizon, where wiser eyes, wiser hearts tether us to the scene. Yet an ounce of God blood or will would rather crash into the impossible than live plotting the probable. Cupid, where the winding staircase ends, holds a finger to his smiling lips. This will be your master, he says of the arrows at his fingertips, feeling like this is a picture moment with no one to take the picture. I know something of all the various angles of falling, why painters and sculptors and poets are always pocketing feathers. Thank you. And this next one is about a club in Long Beach, where I grew up, Long Beach, California. And it was the first time I had ever seen shadow dancing. So this is called shadow dancing. Swinging open saloon doors, real wood, warm and dank to the touch, held and pushed by dozens of sweaty palms, wet backhands gripping bottlenecks, bare shoulders nudging against the grain, a little patch of country heaven in a hole in the wall off Broadway, where I paced and shivered from the ocean breeze, 10 minutes convincing myself to step in. Follow those brave and daring stairs, men twice my age. One beer on his lips, bear smooching 2 days stubble into my cheek. Come inside where it's warm, baby. Nodding to his partner, how adorable this one was. The starched shirt, Guess jeans I shared with my best girlfriends, $15, a bus card, and a fake ID. Stuffed into my back pocket, shielding my ass from several friendly hands. Still exhilarating to be this naughty, nasty even. Offer myself to whatever may come on the other side, where the red walls welcome those in the cold. What the hell? The doorman, a drag king, didn't even check my ID. She just faked a drawl and said, "You have fun now, sweetheart," because she knew us. Twinkie teens who took 3 buses to get from downtown, figured we were going to hell anyways. Except it wasn't. Up tempo, dancer behind dancer, couples swaying in time, each arm moving in unison, a shadow of one another, a shadow of the caustic acceptance that this shadow life was without romance, a little piece of heaven to ward off every time I've doubted its existence. I used to work at Disneyland, so this is a piece from my new collection, and this is called The Optimist. There's this plaque at the entrance of Disneyland. Back in 1955, Walt Disney read the practiced words to the largest television audience at the time. Here, age relives fond memories of the past. I used to work the trains, practiced crying out, "All aboard," over and over. Never tired of the Grand Circle tour. I was a tour guide too, practiced the spiel, "Welcome to Walt Disney's original Magic Kingdom." People cried at the end of the tours, not always, but often enough for me to anticipate the tears. Here youth may savor the challenge and promise of the future. Sometimes you think the worst a man could do in this small world is to be some sort of optimist. Better to focus on climate change or health. My first job at Disneyland, the one I couldn't accept because I didn't have a ride, was going to be Aladdin. I once wanted to be a dancer. I went to the audition and I couldn't. But back then, I could pass for a prince. They had me get on the elephant float, practice waving. I've never stopped imagining people loving me, with the hope that it will be a source of joy and inspiration. It feels like this tour is never ending, station after station. I call out, but more disembark than climb aboard. Sometimes I practice crying. Sometimes I'm an elephant flying. Thank you. And this one is another one from my new collection. It's called Nineveh again. So Nicole was saying that she was going to have us maybe do American poems. And so this is my American. Nineveh again. This too was a great city once, a city on a hill, I would say to Jonah, sitting beneath the shade of a tree that sprouted up overnight. This place too seemed to come up out of nowhere, a miracle, at least in the retelling, certainly not to the 31 dead pilgrims or the natives. I'd say offering him a piece of bread. And I've waited for the moon to fall apart, wipe the board. He'd smile, decline the broiled fish. It's evil to wish for Armageddon, I know, but leaving it as it is, indolent and self-satisfied, barely worth a warning. Let it all go down, deep down. And Jonah go quiet, looking over the Rockies, a herd of bison with fur like sackcloth, jazz clubs on Bourbon Street, the caged flame of liberty, and the dark Atlantic waters. Maybe, he'd offer, maybe we call it a night. Who knows how long this redwood or earth will be here. Let us sleep, and we will either wake up to Judgment Day or another morning in America, like it or not. And I'm going to do one more. Is that fine? We have time?
Yeah, plenty of time, yeah.
Okay. So this one is, I live here in Texas now, and there's a place in Fort Worth that I forget the name of it, but they have a rhinestone seat up hanging up in there, and that's what I wrote this about. So it starts out with a quote from Christopher Solano's Nostalgia Disorder. So this is Christopher Solano. I used to be a docent. I was how the story was told. I said, you are a human, but you can also be saddled like a horse. Each new song from the bandstand made her writhe, ignited an urge to lick her lips, pat her own ass, two-step, waltz, heel toe, and sweat freely, patting her neck with a blue scarf she tucked into the tiny pocket of her jeans, hugging her thin legs to custom-made boots, pink and white leather with sparrows and stars, a rockabilly remnant from the 90s when she was 30 or 40, younger anyway. God bless the honky tonk for swallowing up age in the smoke and joke that nothing here's young, not really. Even the plump college girls simpering in corners under rail-thin boys in ridiculous hats, even they seem etched in a time long past, a time she never knew growing up in Los Angeles, growing cold to a husband, indifferent to another, leaving it all for a girlfriend's wedding in Dallas, buying the Pinterest perfect outfit, a birthday gift to herself, growing old, the corners of her mouth gathering lines, the smooth skin of her arms beginning to sway till she lifted them less, lifted tiny weights that did no goddamn good, wasn't a bra yet invented to hold up time, almost gave it all up till the business trip to Fort Worth, some 20-year-old, tanned and too drunk to care, called her ma'am and asked to take her around the floor, the way someone once did in a movie, maybe. A rhinestone saddle dazzled above them, music she never heard, those young arms, a latent hunger lulled her across the wide expanse of wooden slats, his skull minted breath imbuing her with some Holy Spirit, his lips licking away the lines, his hand patting the firm back into her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, JD. That was so lovely. And your dogs were silent. You see that? You put that good energy out into the universe, you invite them to collaborate, and then they don't want to talk to us. So, wow. All right. So our final reader is Denton Loving. And Denton is the author of the poetry collections Crimes Against Birds from Main Street Rag and Tamp from Mercer University Press. He is a co-founder and editor at Eastover Press and its literary journal Cutleaf. His writing has appeared in numerous publications, including Iron Horse Literary Review, the Kenyon Review, the Tupelo Quarterly, Harvard Divinity Bulletin, the Three Penny Review. Wow, congrats on that one. That's a really tough one. And Ecotone. Let's give a warm round of applause for Denton Loving.
Thank you. And thanks again, Nicole, for inviting me to be part of this. It's great to read with Scott and JD. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you. The poems I'm gonna read tonight are from my new book, Tamp, and one of the central themes from the book is grief. So it's really great for you, Nicole, to have decided to focus on poems about place, because that's kind of that's a very common theme throughout my work always, but also in this book. But it's one that's been a little bit overlooked in favor of the poems about grief. So so I'm going to start with a dream poem that I think still speaks to place. This is called Another River of the Underworld. In my dreams, I walk the banks of an ancient unnamed river surrounding the island of my dead. My heart is a boat with leaking ribs, beached on the river's far shore, long abandoned by the ferryman. I stand on the opposite side of the water and try to recall the four chambers of the ship in the distance. I can only name two, love and regret. So much else remains obscure, but this I know, sleep is another kind of prayer. The title of the book, Tamp, comes primarily from this poem, which I consider kind of a found poem because of the way that it was given to me. I think it'll make sense when you hear it. This is called The Fence Builder. My graves don't rise or sink, the gravedigger says after I show him the place to bury my father. I take in the view as if this valley is what he'll see for eternity. Down the hill, children play outside the elementary school. Sheep pasture around the cemetery. Some people just push their pile of dirt back in, but I tamp the dirt at every level. I'd never wondered why some graves swell and some settle and sag, but the gravedigger's words stay with me. He taps the clay above my sleeping dad, leveling the damp ground just as the man in the casket taught me to tamp around wooden posts to make a new fence last, packing the dirt and rocks so wire is pulled taut, forced to hold for at least a generation. Those rhythmic strikes, a refrain for all who take pride in a task well done. Those men who work the earth. The fence builder erecting his monuments, the gravedigger, and all he lays to rest. Thank you. This poem begins and runs straight into the poem. So there is a barn. There is a barn in this poem, built by men a century ago. No one alive remembers exactly, but someone cut the oaks and sawed the planks, nailed tin sheets to shape the roof. This barn sits by a creek. Some springs the creek overflows and the barn floods. There is a hayloft in this barn, and many poles between the rafters where tobacco once hung to cure. Gaps between the boards let fresh air enter. Below the loft, the barn is divided into stables. Horse tack still hangs in some, though no one alive remembers those horses. Out of hard labor, calves have been born here and died. So too, wound-locked mothers. In the last stall, a man I knew stacked square hay bales as tight as mice, though the hay was thick with thistles. The following fall, the cattle were sold, the pastures left fallow, the man died and the hay moldered. Did I mention the barn is black? Its roof too. The man who packed the hay picked the paint, though there were red barns in his history. Perhaps the barn's color doesn't matter, except to me, because that man was my father. God alone knows if it makes any difference. The hay was wasted by all but the mice, always burrowing through the past. So I'm going to read a couple of cow poems. That was the first one. This second one is called Hagstone, Hexstone, Holy Stone. The farmer enters the mouth of the barn. In shadow, he palms the weathered oak beam above the stable door, feels for a rusty nail to hang a string of baling twine, the other end threaded to a rock with an eye in its center, a natural hole created by the witchery of water boring through the stone over time. Hagstone, Hexstone, Holy Stone, to save his cattle from bad dreams while they're pendulous with unborn calves. He bids his cows good night, trades barn dark for the widening maw of dusk. In his own bed, he counts the years he rifled dry riverbanks, seeking a stone with enough magic to lock so many perils in its threshold, and for peace, to ease his own sleep, to wash away his fears of midnight births, twisted hooves, calves turned backwards, sideways, of umbilical cords wrapped around necks like nooses. Thank you. So I want to say here that just to give a special thanks to JD, who has really supported me in this book. And I'm going to read this poem, which I've never read in a reading, but it's one that JD has said is one of his favorites from the book. So this is called Remembered by Name. Chocolate, a half Jersey, half Angus, the color of milk mixed with magic. She was the first calf my dad agreed was solely mine, a lesson in responsibility. We bottle fed her, raised her as a pet. For 17 years, she scurried from far pastures whenever I called. The spring after she died, I propped her sun-bleached skull on a rock wall overlooking our home in the hollow. Abby, Chocolate's daughter, allergic to weeds, thistledown, sweet Joe pie, ironweed. We could hear her wheeze before we picked out her sleek black back between those of her sisters. Sold before winter for the exact amount of 4 new car tires, one of my dad's hard lessons. Eris, a mother in troubled childbirth, heaving, too tired to scare away. My dad tied a noose around the calf's tiny protruding hooves. Midwifery is easier when the mother stands still, but when my dad pulled, Eris stormed. Mom and I grabbed rope, and Eris dragged 3 of us across our 80 acres until Dad pinned a foot against a fence post, held us until her calf plopped to the ground, gained breath. Baby, a dirty yellow jersey. She looked nothing more than loosely connected bones. She never learned to wean any of her calves, so sometimes we found 2 or more daughters drinking all at once. My dad never saw her without wishing his grandma Susie Baker was alive so he could give her a cow with so much milk. Ellie, solidly, innocently white, whose lifeless body I twice chased buzzards away from. I nursed her with milk in a Ziploc bag, taught her to walk, forced first steps until she was strong enough to walk alone. She became my own child, and she loved me more than her mother, at least for one single day of our lives. Henry Beauclerk, the gentle red giant, sire of many calves. Even my dad regretfully agreed Henry looked sad when loaded on the trailer to be sold at market. Many believe bulls are brutes, dumb and dangerous, but Henry's eyes were soft and wet, as if he knew he would never come home again. Thank you. I think I just gonna wrap up with 2 more poems. This is called The Sherpa Jacket. Obviously, most of these poems are about my dad, and this one speaks to him as well. The Sherpa Jacket. My friend's new jacket jolts me back to 1981, and one just like it my dad wore. Faded denim, Sherpa lined. Is it vintage, I ask? But he says no, it's new from JCPenney. Sure enough, the same waist-length Levi's jacket is online, only $98 for the urban cowboy look. A year after his passing, 20-some years since he wore it last, that jacket still hangs in his closet, mine when I want it. When I was 5, I believed Sherpa's fuzzy naps were real lamb's wool. I'd crawl inside the jacket, get warm, fall asleep. That was the year we lived in Kentucky, in the mining camp where my dad was raised, where the floors stayed cold no matter how hard the furnace churned. We left after that winter. His parents' ghost, too much to live with. And I'll end with this poem, Riding Lawnmower. After the first small engine repairman tells me 5 miles is too far for a house call or a pickup, the second repairman tells me I should disassemble the mower myself, bring him the offending portion. Lincoln said his father taught him to work, but never to like it. My father taught me to work on lawnmowers, so of course I think about buying a new machine. Instead, I crawl onto summer warm grass like my father taught me. I pull S-pins and retaining springs, freeing suspension arms and the anti-sway bar, separating clutch rod from clutch lever. I mechanic my way beyond my skill set until the mulching deck falls limp. A pneumatic drill unlocks frozen, broken blades turned upside down. New ones hex bolt on, naked edges glinting in the light. I reverse engineer, reattach metal to metal, secure it all with a taut pulley belt. Such unbindings and rebindings are common. This tractor and I will again tame briar hills of blackberry, wild rose. We will battle stones rising quietly in the pasture at night like ghosts. There is no choice but to keep going, to keep working until the final unfixable end. Thank you all.
Wow. You know, I read those poems, but to hear you read them is something else.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I'm so sad about the cows. I'm crying here. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm very sensitive about animals. Okay. So that was the end of the featured readers. I just wanted to give the audience a few minutes to ask any questions of the poets if you have any. If you don't, it's okay, no pressure, but they are here. So if you have any questions about craft or anything in particular, Lenny, go ahead.
Well, yeah, you guys were great. Of course, I've heard Scott before and love his work, but JD and Denton, just marvelous. I'm glad to have been introduced to your work. It's just, I love it, these Zoom readings, it's really do that. But my question, just real quick to the three of you, do you remember what your first poem was or how old you were when you wrote your first poem? And what was the spark that created it? What impetus, what made you write it? And that would be whoever wants to answer it.
I can start. I'm going to ignore the very first poem that I ever wrote, which was in college and undergraduate school for a department poetry contest. It was really, really horrible. I try not to remember that poem too much. I think the first real poem that I wrote was when I was beginning to take my own writing more seriously, and I was reading a lot of poetry, and I was listening to a man who was one of my dad's best friends, who had this wonderful cadence, and he had stepped away to take a phone call, but I could hear him, and I realized as I was listening to him that everything that he said was a poem, and I walked away not thinking that I would do anything with it, but the lines that he said just kept repeating in my head, and I had to write them down, and that was my first poem.
Scott, all right. I do remember my first poem was in high school. We had a creative writing magazine, and they kind of said, write a poem. So my best friend at the time in high school, he didn't really know who his dad was, and so I wrote a poem. It was very cheesy, very sentimental, about like not knowing who your dad is, and they put it in that magazine. So I was like, so it was kind of like they created a monster, because then they just told me like I could do this. So.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of moments that I probably could point to, because I feel like I'm always writing the first poem because it's so hard, and I feel like writing poems is so hard, and like every time you do it, it's like, wait, I don't even know how to do this. How does this work again? But the thing that my mind went to was at summer camp one year, I like took a poetry class with a guy who's probably like the first like poet I'd ever met, and writing a few poems for that class. I remember specifically one, like he assigned us to go like sit by a creek and write about it, and I mean, I have no idea what that poem was about, and I don't have it anymore, but that's kind of the first experience of someone being like, hey, like go sit in nature and tell me about it.
That was a really good question, Lenny. Thank you for that. Difficult, but good. Anyone else have any other questions? No? Okay.
I have a question if no one else does.
Go ahead, Scott.
For JD and Denton. I noticed that, Denton, when you were talking about how there was that poem that you read that you don't normally read aloud, and that JD encouraged you to read it. And I feel like, I wonder if this is true for a lot of poets, where you end up reading kind of the same poems when you go out, and they're like poems in your book that you just don't ever pull out into the light and read live. I was just wondering if that happens to you, and is it something you try to fight against, or it's just like, well, it is what it is. Like, these are just the ones that sit on the page, and these are the ones that I try to voice out loud.
I definitely think that's true. I don't think I actively try to fight it too much, but I'm aware that, and I mean, you probably feel this way too, that especially after you have a book, then you begin to maybe feel like, oh yeah, this one is familiar and comfortable, but it also begins to feel like a little bit tired to you. There are ones that you kind of know that, oh, people seem to really respond to this one. They like this one, that makes sense. And there are some that just don't read as well out loud. They do seem to work better on the page. So I feel like for me, since I've been reading with this book for the last couple of months, I was able to pick a couple that told the narrative, gave the narrative arc, and that's felt like what I've stuck with mostly. So it was really nice to be able to say, oh, I want to read this new one tonight. And again, I appreciate JD for, encouraging me without even meaning to, but it was fun to deviate a little bit, right?
Yeah, I love that poem, right? But I understand why it's not in the rotation, because it's also a longer poem. And so when to answer Scott's question is like, a longer poems I try to stay away from, because sometimes there's not enough time to put those in, although I'd love to read longer poems. But my mom. You know, audiences as great as they are, they'd be like, "Are we finished yet?" And so like I think that Remember by Name is actually kind of a perfect size poem, though. It's like right there where it's long enough to kind of tell a whole story, but not overly long. And I've got a lot of overly long stuff. And I think so, like the things that I cut out, Cliff Books told me, like, you know, don't read sad things. And so I was like, oh, that's all my stuff. Like I have all sad things. What are you doing? And so I try to like not read a bunch of sad things, but you know, that cuts out like 75%. And then anything I have to do voices for, I failed out of acting school, so I am not good at the voices. So I try to avoid that. But yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, Scott, I'd love to hear your answer to that for you.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely when I was reading specifically for the book when it came out, I had one poem that I always opened with because I felt like it set the right tone for the reading. Because there was a bunch of poems in the book that are supposed to be funny. And so I wanted to read one that had like a very clear punchline at the end of it, just to like let people know that it's okay to laugh. Like it's, you know, it's fine. And the one reading that I didn't do that, I felt like the reading totally went off the rails and it didn't work. So then I always stuck with that one poem up top. But I'm also like, I can't help just like reading new stuff. I'm really bad about that. Like, I'm just like everything I read tonight is within the last 2 years. I mean, it's not, none of that stuff is in the book. So yeah, I just love like testing things out, and just seeing how it feels. Because there's something about, I mean, you can read it out loud to yourself, but it's different when there's people, people are listening in a room or in a Zoom room, and it puts a different kind of pressure on it. And I always learn things by doing it. So yeah.
I think that's a really good point, because I've noticed too that it's one thing when you read it to yourself, but then when you read it to an audience and you see how they react, sometimes you want to go back and revise. And I learned that a lot with my first book, that man, I wish I would have read some of these poems out loud before I published them. And so with the second book, I actually started testing them out on people. And some of them I'd go back and say, okay, this kind of flopped. You got to test it out with multiple audiences though, right? Because sometimes people are just having a bad night and different people react in different ways. But I think it's a really good point to try your new stuff out on other people and just kind of see whether or not what lands and what doesn't. Were you going to say something, Lenny?
I wanted to ask you about what ELJ editions is or are. I'm completely new to this reading. I don't know if you've been having them for a while or.
Sure. So ELJ Editions is a publisher out of New York, and Redacted Books is a series of books that I just started editing. You were at Maureen Seaton's reading on Sunday, and the first book that I published in the Redacted Books series was Maureen's. So ELJ Editions has been around for a while. I actually have a book coming out with them in November, but Ariana Den Bleicher, who is the publisher of ELJ Editions, had asked me if I would be interested in helping run an imprint. And I said, I would love that, but I want to be able to pick the books, because I want it to be something that I'm very passionate about. And I only want to choose 2 a year, because I really want to be able to devote my attention to those and help those writers get publicized, right? And I have a pretty crazy busy job and a lot of other things going on, so I just wanted to choose 2 that I knew I could really give my attention to. So we had our first open call, and we'll be announcing the 2 books that'll be published, and I'm going to try to open each May for 2 manuscripts a year. So that's my idea behind it. But ELJ Editions has it's a smaller press, but it's got a pretty cool lineup of poets. One of my good friends, Jared Beloff, just published a book with ELJ Editions that's gorgeous. So yeah, I'm trying to do all I can to support small presses out there. So they've got a good thing going on. And this series was another thing that Ariana said, I have this pro Zoom account, I'd like to use it more. I said, well, what would you think about me doing a reading series? I know a lot of poets, and I think it'd be really cool to highlight not just poets from Miami and South Florida, obviously, but poets from other parts of the United States. And when people have new books out, I'm trying to bridge people together to give them a platform to promote. Lenny, I know you have a new book out, so I'd love to have you come read in a future event if you're open to it.
I don't have a new book out. I've been working on this manuscript for 2 or 3 years now, and every time I think it's done, it reminds me that it's not. So,
Oh,
yeah, no, I haven't a new book out.
I thought you just,
But what you saw online, I just reposted an old post that was an online chapbook.
oh,
And I just sent it back out there, and people reacted like, "Oh, congratulations!" Well, no, yeah, it came out in 2019.
hey, we're
But
only
you know,
behind the ball, okay?
yeah.
I was
But
brand
I'll let you know though, sure.
new. Okay, well, please do, because we always love to have you. And Lenny is the editor of a new zine online journal called Witchery. And he invented a new form called the e-poem, which I did write one over the 4th of July. And I'm scared to send it to you, but I'm going to anyway, because I know you won't judge. If it's terrible, you'll just tell me.
I will, but
I-
I doubt it, so please do.
Okay, so I don't know if Lenny's open to submissions or not, but if any of you want to try
Oh,
your
yeah.
e-poem, it's kind of cool to write. So we can do that. Okay, well,
I have a Florida anthology ongoing.
talk about
As
that.
well, you know that, right? And I'm gonna get Scott to send something for it as well. And in
Yeah.
fact, the whole idea came from Scott when we met you came up to Del Rey, remember, at the library reading, Judy was there. And we were looking through that old Florida anthology that you had, remember we were going through it? So that's what gave me the idea, so, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That reading was so much fun. That was one of my favorite readings.
Yeah, we got to get Scott in there because Scott's got some very, very good Miami poems. So I'm going to wrap up here, but I just want to tell you all again that this series is the first Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. I'm trying to do something consistent that people can look forward to. And next month, we're going to be featuring pop culture poetry. And I have 3 readers lined up, Dustin Brookshire and Alex Kerrigan and another poet, Eric Furr. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think. We're going to celebrate some Barbie poems, some RuPaul Drag Race poems, some Real Housewife poems, Sarah Michelle Gellar. It's going to be a lot of fun. So if you're interested, sign up. And yeah, this was so fun. I'm always just so pleased to be able to hear you read, and it's just an honor to have you share this space with me. So thank you so much for giving me your time. I know everybody's got a lot going on, and I'm going to download the recording from the cloud and I'll post it on online so that people can see it and share it with your friends and family and fans who weren't able to be with us tonight. So again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nicole. Great job.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care, everybody. Hope to see you again
Thanks,
soon.
everyone.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you all so much.